frankly. There'll be a continuation.
Trump will do whatever it takes to retain power.
Trump is an autocrat, and when an autocrat tells you what he is and what he's going to do, we should believe him. Good afternoon. Welcome to The Count, a co-production of Now This and The Appeal. I'm Emily Galvan-Almanza. This is my co-host, Alana Sivan. It's Wednesday, October 14th, and you know what that means? We've got 20 days left until the election. Now, this is a show about the election, but it's not just about the election. This is a show about how the Trump campaign could subvert our democracy by setting aside the will of the people, setting aside your votes, violating our system, our very democracy itself, and cheating their way to victory in what could amount really to a hostile takeover of the democratic process. So we're going to start today's show with a conversation about, I guess, the hot topic on everyone's mind, the United States Supreme Court and the ongoing hearings involving Amy Coney Barrett, who is, I believe, she may still be speaking in front of the Senate. I don't know if they've concluded hearings for the day, but we're going to talk about what happened today, what happened yesterday, the conversation around the court's historical role as the grown-up in the room of our government, and what we expect to see if in 2020 there's a new justice hastily and perhaps illegitimately added to the court, but weighing in on controversies arising from this presidential election.
So as we know right now, the court that we are going to see, the Supreme Court that we are going to see on the day of the election and the days afterwards is not decided yet. And that's what this whole hearing that we're seeing right now happening is about. And it's really likely that she's going to be confirmed is what we're seeing. And we'll put aside the sort of hypocrisy that we've seen from the Republican Party, particularly given everything that happened with Merrick Garland, but we'll just put that aside for now and talk about what that means for today. And what we're going to be seeing is that if she is confirmed, we're going to be seeing a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, a 6-3 conservative majority that will potentially have a really big role to play in the election fiasco that we've been talking about throughout this whole series.
Yeah, it would be interesting, right? Because it would be the most conservative court this country has seen in a really long time, at a time when that does not reflect the actual makeup of our nation. So it's not like our nation has become more conservative and this court now represents us. It's just that the court's members seem to be diverging wildly from the people. And considering the role the Supreme Court has had previously in decisions like the 2000 election, the Bush v. Gore case, we are sort of in this position of being forced to wonder what will happen. I could say if, I might mean when, those 9 justices are asked to rule on litigation brought by Donald Trump attempting to set aside or stop the counts of votes, set aside the votes, et cetera. But luckily, we, me and Alana, are not left to wander by ourselves and wonder by ourselves alone in a room. We have Jay Willis with us, which is really exciting. Jay is a senior contributor to The Appeal, my colleague on our other daily show, The Briefing, my colleague in many different things. But Jay is, according to his own Twitter bio, a whiz on all things courts, judges, laws, elections. Jay, we are so happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Look, he looks like he's trying to get out of it.
Yeah, I did the first mute mistake of the day. It's a great start. Thank you for having me. Frankly, if I knew you were going to take my bio from my Twitter handle, I would have put like something cooler there. But like what's done is done.
Public facing, Jay. It's public facing.
Yep.
And I muted myself my first episode too, so you're good.
That's a journey we're taking together.
So we're really excited to talk to you about the confirmation hearings and sort of all the intricacies of everything that's happening there. But I think the first thing that we want to talk to you about, that I really want to hear from you about, is the impact of this whole process and of potentially Amy Coney Barrett being on the Supreme Court on the upcoming election and what sort of decisions that could decide for our country.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court, it's going to be the court of last resort for any challenges to voting based on federal law. And then it's also going to be the court of last resort for any appeals from state Supreme Courts. So if there's controversies about counting votes in, let's say, Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, or just like to pick another hypothetical example, Florida, that would end up before the Supreme Court. And I do think what we're seeing during the Barrett nomination and confirmation process are indications that Republicans are really counting on the Supreme Court to go their way. So Ted Cruz has said that it's important not to have an even number of justices on the court so that there wouldn't be a tie, which is like, it's sort of funny, the idea that a 5-3 Republican court would conceivably tie in a situation like this, but that's been his rationale so far. We also saw Senator Lindsey Graham, who is heading the Barrett confirmation hearings, talk about the possibility of the Supreme Court deciding the election. He said, whatever the Supreme Court decides, we would abide by that, which again, that's not really how elections work, right? I'm pretty sure voters are supposed to decide it. And I grant you that maybe what he means there is whatever the Supreme Court would decide in a case. But to me, there's something like a little bit insidious and off about the idea that the Republican Party could lose an election in the United States and then win it in a Supreme Court that's stacked in their advantage.
Right. And that would be, again, kind of. I mean, kind of. So thinking back to Bush v. Gore and sort of the role that the Supreme Court could play, like the 2000 election notably led to the court's decision in Bush v. Gore, which did not, it was a controversial decision. It did not end Al Gore's campaign, but it was a very serious blow that arguably resulted in Al Gore conceding the election. And I know that, so I just want to dip into this for a second. Bush v. Gore has been criticized by legal experts across the political spectrum. Can you unpack for us why they say this decision sucked?
Oh, God. Yeah. Like, I'm definitely filing HR complaints against you guys once this is over for making me read Bush v. Gore again. Like, that was not a task I appreciated this
Talk
morning.
about it with your therapist, Jay. Talk about it.
Yeah. So the scene is there's a razor thin margin in Florida. It's a very close election between Bush and Gore. And whoever wins Florida is going to win the election. At the same time, there's this pile of, we don't really know how many thousands, tens of thousands of votes that aren't counted, that have some kind of discrepancy on them, where it's not clear what the voter who they wanted to support. So federal law says, it prescribes this thing called the safe harbor law, which says that if you're a state and you get your electors in by this date.
December 8th this year?
Is that what it is? Okay.
It is.
Yeah, the date changes every year. It's one of those like first Monday following the last Tuesday or something like that. But in 2000, it was December 12th. So this deadline is rapidly approaching. These Florida counties have all these ballots that they're trying to count, and there's not really precedent for what's going to happen here. So the court steps in, a 5-4 Republican controlled court, and it basically hands the election to George W. Bush. And their rationale is that it's not possible by the safe harbor date to conduct a recount in accordance with the Equal Protection Clause. They say you can't treat these ballots specially or value one person's vote over the other. Now, like in my view, this is a really weird way of characterizing counting votes. Like saying that you can't count votes the way you counted all the other votes. It's a little bit like saying, well, why are police on the highway pulling over only the drivers driving 100 miles an hour? Like there's a special reason that they're going for this. And the court just sort of ignores that. Famously,
the court basically said, like, we don't think you can finish counting, and so you're not even supposed to try.
Yeah, and well, the other famous line that they put in there is they said, this can't be conducted fairly without doing substantial additional work. And like in my view, saying that as a rationale for stopping a recount is like the kind of conclusion you can only draw if you're a Republican justice trying to get your Republican candidate into the White House. But
I'm going to start trying that at work. I can't do this assignment. It would require substantially more work, actually.
So much, yeah.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I think is really important to draw from this is that it just misses how elections work in this country. And I think we could see a lot of that coming up in 2020. We have a decentralized system of elections. They're not administered at the federal level. They're administered by states, by local governments. There's different standards everywhere. And if you take the principle of Bush v. Gore and you extend it to its logical conclusion, it basically means that every election violates the Equal Protection Clause. Now that, of course, would be absurd. So the last thing that this Bush v. Gore court did is they put in a paragraph that says, just so you know, this applies only to this election and can't be used going forward. You hear conservative justices, judges, activists talk a lot about judicial activism, about not wanting to legislate from the bench. And this is about as clear as an example of that as it gets. It's not based on the law. It's not based on facts. It's just based on getting their candidate over the finish line.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because I think about the hearings right now and some of the things that we've heard Amy Coney Barrett say, well, actually not say about the election, about the integrity of this election. So she said, for example, that, well, she refused to answer whether it's illegal under federal law to intimidate voters at the polls, which we know that that is illegal.
Yeah, that seems wrong.
Right. That's. I think we can all agree that's wrong, right? Yeah. Okay. And illegal. She's also refused to say that Trump can not unilaterally delay the election, which we know that he legally cannot do that, right? Right.
The Constitution.
Right. There's that. And then she's also refused to say whether or not she'd recuse herself from a decision about this election. And then probably the most concerning thing that she said, or that she's evaded saying, was answering a question about whether presidents should commit to a peaceful transfer of power. We're going to play that clip right now and come back to you for a response.
Do you believe that every president should make a commitment unequivocally and resolutely to the peaceful transfer of power?
Well, Senator, that seems to me to be pulling me in a little bit into this question of whether the president has said that he would not peacefully leave office. And so to the extent that this is a political controversy right now, as a judge, I want to stay out of it, and I don't want to express a view.
Well, Jay, what do you make of this?
I'm sorry, that kind of kicks ass that she can just be like, peaceful transfer of power, sounds like a tricky partisan thing to me. Yeah, that rules. In terms of this question as to whether or not she would recuse herself from an election-related case, which I know a lot of Democratic senators have called on her to do. Like, sure, yes, that should happen. But like, of course she's not going to do that. Like, why would she? This is the whole point of the conservative legal movement, is to entrench this minoritarian government in an electorally unaccountable branch of government. It doesn't have to convince voters that its reactionary policy preferences are right. It just gets to say that it's the law. Her recusing in this case would be tantamount to surrender, and it's just not going to happen. Now, nominees for the Supreme Court typically sort of beat around the bush, right, on all of these substantive questions they get asked. That's why they're pretty much entirely political theater, political show, and I don't see a whole lot of utility in watching them. But it does lead to this very silly outcome, right, where Cory Booker is asking, hey, if there were a democratic emergency, do you think you would step in to prevent it? And she's like, it's just not something I can address at this time.
I wish I'd known that in law school, that you could answer to every question. You could just be like, well, I don't have the briefing. And I haven't reviewed, all the facts. They might not all be in this test here. There could be facts beyond the exam. So I just can't answer any of these questions properly.
They're not laid out in the law that is written on the books that I can just read right now.
Professor, that seems complicated and beyond the amount of time that we have for this cold call. So naturally, I will pass.
Plus, it might require extra work.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of work. Yeah.
Okay, we're laughing, but this is scary. And maybe we're laughing because it's scary. I want to go back to something you said a second ago about the court being unelected. ostensibly apolitical, but as we've noticed, like totally political. But this is a group of people with enormous power, with lifetime appointments, who were not chosen by the voters, who now may be asked to play this ridiculously outsized role in a task that is by the Constitution reserved to the voters by way of the Electoral College. So it's weird. It's putting the court in an unconstitutional position. But Trump has been very over. Like, I think to me, if I were the president and I wanted to do something totally illegal with the Supreme Court, I would probably be like downplaying it right now. But Trump has said outright that he was counting on the Supreme Court to look at the ballots. Can we play that clip?
Are you counting on the Supreme Court, including a Justice Barrett, to settle any dispute?
Yeah, I think I'm counting on them to look at the ballots, definitely. I hope we don't need them in terms of the election itself. But for the ballots, I think so.
Okay, so Jay, it seems like Donald Trump is treating the Supreme Court like his own personal judges that he can count upon to give him cover. But what is he saying? Like, can he ask the Supreme Court to look at the ballots? Like, how far can we go down this crazy path?
Yeah, well, like literally speaking, ostensibly the Supreme Court doesn't do fact finding, right? Unless it's Justice Scalia making up a right to a gun out of nowhere. Like generally, they just go on what the record below says. So you're not actually going to have a situation in which like Brett Kavanaugh is squinting at a dimpled Chad or whatever. But your question about how Trump perceives them, I think is the really important one. Obviously, the justices, what's the party line, right? They would say, I'm independent, I'm impartial, I'm not in Trump's pocket. First of all, that's just not how the conservative legal movement works. The Republican Party's agenda, the conservative ideology depends for their success on voter suppression, on thinning out the electorate, and sort of handpicking a coalition that will put them in office. Everything else depends on judges rubber stamping electoral results that favor Republicans. But also, even if judges don't think of themselves that way, it's really telling how Trump came away from their interactions, right? Like, Trump is really big on loyalty. He famously asked Jim Comey for a loyalty oath, which, as far as I can remember, worked out great for everyone involved. But like, even if he's in a private conversation with Neil Gorsuch or Brett Kavanaugh or Amy Coney Barrett, and he says, I need your loyalty, will you do this way? Even if they don't actually say yes, like even if they don't, stand up and deliver a spirited West Wing rebuke of the idea of not being an independent judge, like they might not literally swear an oath, but they're also not going to do something to dissuade him from the notion that they are in his pocket. The bottom line is that Trump thinks they're loyal and expects them to be loyal, because otherwise he wouldn't have actually given them the job in the first place.
That is not terrifying at all.
Yeah, no, that's not what I do here.
I want to bring it back to something that you just mentioned, which is that sort of the framing of the Republicans' conservative agenda and how they've sort of used judges to advance that. And, I know today we're really focused on the effect of this appointment on the election, but this is a lifetime appointment, so it's going to outlast the election. So can you talk a little bit more about sort of what that looks like in the future and sort of the long-lasting impact it'll have on pushing that agenda?
Yeah, I think it's really simple. When more people vote and when more of the ballots that people cast are counted, Democrats tend to win elections. Conversely, inversely, I never know. The other way around, when fewer people vote and when fewer of those ballots that people cast gets counted, Republicans tend to win elections. What the Republican Party counts on is a judiciary, especially a federal judiciary, that will enable them to thin out that electorate and keep them electorally relevant. It's never going to stop being bonkers to me that like the Republican Party is sort of the party of performative patriotism and like we're the greatest democracy in the world. but also like a key part of their agenda is making sure that as few of people as possible can participate in it. And I think you see this in the way that the electorate has shifted over the years. The party's acceptance of racism and xenophobia into its tent are indicative of the fact that their constituency is shrinking. Like the Republican Party in its modern sense is this coalition of like the fiscal conservatives and the small government people and like the libertarian dorks, but also like single choice or single issue anti-choice voters and homophobes. Like these aren't people who have a lot in common.
Right.
But what the Republican Party is realizing is that the groups from which they can draw support are dwindling, and it's tough for them to find new reservoirs of support. They're not really competing for voters anymore. They're just trying to suppress the votes of people who they don't think will support them.
Wow, that throws the whole thing off balance, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not great. Like, again, I don't.
When people stop competing for your vote, it means they no longer care what you want. And that's a big problem.
Yeah, like this is not a segment or a show on which we discuss like great news most often, but I do think it's important to go all the way through.
Absolutely. Well, Jay, thank you so much for going all the way through it with us. And thank you for joining us. We appreciate you imparting your Supreme Court knowledge, and we expect to have you report back here as soon as possible to do so again.
Thanks so much for having me. Can't wait. Bye now.
Thank you.
Oh, man. Thinking about the Supreme, I called the Supreme Court at the top of the show. I refer to them as the adults in the room. It really is like in many instances how I think of them. It's like the guardrails, make whatever protective metaphor you want, but they are gone, man. I mean, this is supposed to be a check in our whole checks and balances structure. It's supposed to be a check on the other branches, a group of apolitical people who will stand up against abuses of authority and illegal conduct and stand up for norms and decency. And what's scary to me is that clearly Donald Trump does not care about destroying norms and decency and like the traditional role of the Supreme Court. But by choosing people to sit on that court who are willing to do Trumpian things, and I will remove this from the political discussion, right? Because there are Republicans who are not willing to do Trumpian things. I'm sure that there are.
Right.
But by choosing people who are willing to do Trumpian things to sit in a lifetime appointment on the nation's highest court, we're creating this body of people. It's a little bit like choosing a death qualified jury, right? When you've got a death penalty case, one of the most unfair things about it is that the prosecutor is allowed to create a jury out of people who believe in their right to kill other humans, who believe in the death penalty. I feel like we're getting like a Trump qualified Supreme Court. And when you have a Trump qualified Supreme Court, like, yes, you have a group of people who are willing to just like blow the rails off our democracy and to hand the election over to an autocrat. But you also have a group of people who will destroy the future of this country on other issues like climate change, which to me is the single biggest existential threat we face. And, you know, a million other issue areas where these Trump qualified justices are going to get to impose ideology that is so far away from our norms that it will harm us and not represent what we want.
Right. And we see too, I mean, specifically with this nominee, listen, I get it, right? When you're a judge or somebody who wants to be a justice, you have to have this sort of appearance of being impartial, from being independent, but you can't even say that a president should commit to a transfer of power that is peaceful. You can't even say, she also said today that she could not answer whether or not absentee voting is important. She can't even answer these simple questions. And it sort of, to me, plays into this overall reshaping of truth that has happened under Trump, right? Like he has his facts versus facts. And he's chosen a nominee for justice who is willing to say, well, every single fact that is in the universe, it's up in the air. And I can't decide what the real facts are until you give me the briefings and I hear from the litigants. And it's so scary because even this president, he's here for a temporary period of time, hopefully. But this Supreme Court panel is going to be there forever. Not forever, but for a lifetime.
It's going to feel like forever.
It's going to feel like forever. And it's going to affect future generations. And that's really, really frightening.
Yeah. I mean, millions of lives were lost as a result of Bush v. Gore.
Mhm.
And when you consider, like I said, the existential planetary threats we're dealing with right now, I mean, millions of lives, more millions of lives, if not billions of lives, are going to be impacted beyond the bounds of this nation. But in addition to that, also, it's just really weird. Like, you've got a justice or a judge justice whose hearing right now is like, the legitimacy of this very hearing is in question, right? We are people are already voting. We're not 20 days out from an election. We're in the middle of an election, right? It's a very slow election, but it's happening. We're in the middle of it. So it's this appointment that's happening under very questionable circumstances. And here's a judge who's being handed like questions that anyone should be able to answer very easily. Is this crime illegal? Yes, that's a crime under this, federal code section. I don't know, how I would decide the case in controversy you raising, but I can tell you that what you just said, yes, that is a crime. Yes, it is a crime to intimidate people at the polls. Yes, it is a crime to refuse to leave office after you've been voted out. Although I don't know if that's.
She also didn't even know what the First Amendment protects.
Right. But like, what it comes back to me is you've got Republicans who've had to do a lot of like very performative, wishy-washy. You get the Susan Collins things, right? I'm uncomfortable. I don't know how I feel about this. I'm totally going to vote in favor of it, but right now I'm uncomfortable. And to me, Amy Coney Barrett is just she's making it harder, and we should be making it harder on the Republicans who might waver by refusing to take any form of judicial position or answer very, very simple questions that a judge should be able to answer. I don't think she's displaying qualifications. And I think that should make it harder on people like Susan Collins who are fighting for their seat.
Right. And I think we've seen that for Trump, the most important qualification, kind of like Jay was saying, is loyalty, and that you follow sort of his general ideals, his policy ideals, by the way, which she claims she has no position on.
No position on that. We don't know what the First Amendment is. Okay. Moving right along then to polling and the will of the people. So our next segment takes us back to the central question of the show, right? What's going to happen on election night? It has become an American tradition that on election night, we get a conclusive result. Somebody has all the balloons drop and they accept, the president, somebody concedes. There's a very elegant speech. That's the nerd Super Bowl that we're all waiting for, with higher ratings in the Super Bowl, but worse commercials. But this is 2020. Nothing is normal in 2020. 2020 has taken so much from us already. And I think election night is also going to be taken from us. With COVID and mail-in voting and, confusion and one drop-off box for all of Harris County, Texas, we're in an election that is completely unprecedented. And as Ohio State law professor Ned Foley has said, and other elections have told us, the outcome of many, many Democrats voting by mail and many Republicans showing up on election day will be what they're calling the red mirage and the blue shift. Election night might look like a Trump lead, and then the days that follow, the mail-in ballots will naturally push us back in the blue shift, back towards Joe Biden. So how do we brace for this? Alana, is this normal? Is this what's going to happen?
Well, the blue shift is normal. That we know is normal. And despite the fact that the blue shift is normal, we know and have discussed at length how Trump is going to claim that it's actually a blue steal. And he's going to do that by playing into all of our desires to have election night results, right? Like, an election night is exciting. Everybody, probably virtually this year gets together and they think about the election results and they wear their little I voted stickers and put them on the Instagram and all of those things. And so Trump knows that, and he knows that after this really difficult year that everybody has had, that people are going to want a result on election night. But we're probably not going to have one. And so Trump will be able to say on election night, if he has some sort of lead, that I won the election. Everything that comes in after election day is fake. You should reject it. And by doing that, really play into sort of this desire that people have to have an election day result.
By the way, I'm putting my stake in the ground right now. I'm betting he's going to claim victory whether or not he has a lead on election day. That is my assessment of his Twitter character. But so, okay, let's turn to our polling. New national polling by Data for Progress and the Justice Collaborative Institute out today shows that American voters are, like Alana says, not in any way prepared for the eventuality of not having an answer on election day. In fact, nearly half of likely voters still believe that they will know the winner of this election on election day. Here to discuss that fact and this poll with us is Jason Gans, Chief of Staff for Data for Progress. Thank you, Jason. It's good to see you. Good to have you here again. Let's put the poll results up so that you can talk about them.
Hi.
Talk us through this. Can you see the screenshot? What's going on here?
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is that people, or around half of people are thinking that this is going to be a somewhat normal election night. And that makes sense, right? Our whole lives, we have kind of been trained, at least for the people that follow politics closely, to tune into election night. You have the big map on the wall and you have the states flying around. And then ultimately you wait and you hear them say, I've seen enough. I'm calling it. It's done. And so this has become a tradition. It's become ingrained in people's minds. But this year, with the huge rise in mail-in voting, with the rise in absentee ballots and all of these things, it's really important to make sure that people are informed of the fact that this blue shift, as you say, will be occurring. And so we see that right now, some people are getting it. Over half of people understand that it's unlikely that we're going to have it on election night. But it's still important to do everything that we can to make sure that people understand that there is a possibility that it will not be called on election night, because there is always the possibility that Joe Biden has a good night and a Florida or a North Carolina gets called for him early, and then it's probably pretty likely that it would get called for Biden on election night. But if not, since the states that are taking longer are the states that Trump would essentially have to go 100% in, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and those states take longer to hit, then it's very likely that we could see an extended battle playing out over the next few days and weeks.
And Jason, I'm really happy that you talked about how important it is to be informed around the climate that we're at, because you informed people. And you told folks that were being polled that mail-in ballots take longer to count. You told them that the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania recently stated that not all votes will be counted on election night. And then also that election results have not normally been immediately clear in states that have relied on mail-in ballots in the past. And after you did that, we saw a change in responses. Can you talk a little bit about that? Let's pull that up.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we saw is that there are a good percentage of voters who, when they are told all of these facts about mail-in voting, the fact that election day results often differ for mail-in voting, that it can take weeks, particularly bringing up the Arizona Senate race in 2018, where Sinema was initially down and then dramatically came back day by day to ultimately end up winning by over 2%. So these can be really dramatic shifts. And when you see this, you see, so the really important thing to note here is that this took the people down that were very confident that we were going to have a result on election night down to just 15%. And I think it's those very confidence that we want to be looking at, because if you're somewhat confident that we have a result, but then you're seeing mail results filter in, then you'll probably be okay with it. But the fact that we were able to get the very confident people down to just 15% by repeating this basic information just shows the importance that we have, the importance of the task that we have, the media has, that our elected officials, at least the sane ones, have, to make sure that voters are aware of the drawbacks of trying to make a conclusion about an election on election night. And this is actually pretty encouraging because it shows that all we have to do is get a set of relatively basic facts, they're public record, and you tend to get people moving along with them pretty well.
So I get that. Actually, I was very encouraged by what you just said about, maybe Joe Biden will win Florida and another, some decisive jurisdiction, and we will have a result on election night. And maybe some people are just like unreasonably optimistic about their candidate, and like maybe this is their coping mechanism. But I don't think that can explain all of it. And I'm wondering if you could speak to sort of what Alana raised at the top, which is this idea of like people being sort of like psychologically primed to need an answer to this question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think we have to look any further. Like many problems in America right now, this can be traced directly back to the president's Twitter feed. We must have an answer on election night. Mail-in ballots are fake. We demand, the people need to know. When you have Trump out there spouting that we have to have an answer on election night, this goes back to, it's the same thing we're talking about over the past few days, how there's a certain segment of the country that is deeply under Trump's sway, and they live in essentially a parallel reality from us. And that continues to be scary, and these people are going to believe whatever he says. They're going to demand an answer on election night if he says so. But again, that's only 15% of the population. So it's important to be aware that they exist, and then it's important to be aware of the power that we all have to make sure that they are not allowed to drive the narrative. They are not allowed to falsely claim victory when we, in fact, got more votes and won. And it's important to remember that these people are out there. They will be out there, and they will be having loud people at the top of the political spectrum. They'll have the media. They'll have the entire far-right ecosystem on their side. But at the end of the day, that doesn't matter if we can show up and show them that there are more of us than there are more of them, and we're able to make this work. But that does include not just voting, but also the education around the vote in mail to make sure that people know that, let's just calm down a little bit and let it play out, No need to be so hasty.
I think, so speaking of education, Alana, I know you and I were talking a lot about the role the media is going to play, and I know you had some thinking on that. I don't know if you wanted to raise, before we release Jason back into the wild, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the media question.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what you just said sort of speaks to the responsibility that folks in the media have to make sure that people don't think that election results are going to come out on election night. And so I'm curious, what do you think of that? So how can media outlets be a little bit better about making sure that there isn't that expectation?
Yeah, this is a tough one, and this is why I'm so glad there are programs like you folks that are able to be out there and to spread this, because the incentive for the media is to turn this into, they want it to be like the Super Bowl because it gets good ratings for them. So it's really, really hard to kind of break through the media narrative. They're so used to entrenched in like the kind of like election day being their biggest day. But I think it's important for people in the media to hold themselves to the standard, for us to hold the media to the standard of the media should be informing voters, and they should be working really, really hard to make sure that all of these facts are known. And instead of having your big giant dashboard up, the race to 270 and all of that stuff that they love doing, maybe spend a little bit of that time focusing on understanding what goes into an election night in a pandemic and how that might be different than normal, and just making sure that you're cognizant of kind of the impact of the media that you're putting out. And again, like it just speaks to the importance of the work that you folks are doing and getting this out there, because to be honest, many in the cable news network have been working to drum up ratings a little bit more than they've been getting the voter education out.
We're really lucky, Jason. We don't have ratings. We're on the internet, so we can just educate people and not have any commercials. And I bet we can say curse words and nobody can stop us.
I heard one. I heard one earlier and I was like, oh, I can do that.
My mom is watching.
I think I was guilty of that earlier in the week.
I might drop one of these days. Sorry, Dad.
Oh, man. All right, well, Jason, that was totally fascinating. Thank you again for joining us. I'm sure we will be seeing you more times this week, so don't go too far. Go do some polls, and we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Oh, my goodness. Alana, okay, so there's this thing I have to raise, because when I think about people needing an answer on election day, it's exactly the thing you mentioned at the top that I can't stop thinking about, which is we are at a point, and I feel this in like the depths of my soul. I desperately want the question of who is going to lead this nation for the next 4 years to be resolved. And part of that is because we've been through so much stress and so much uncertainty, and like a news cycle that is mentally incredibly taxing. And every day we have to think about Donald Trump doing something outrageous. And I'm tired. And I think a lot of other people are tired. And it occurred to me that the thing that makes us want so desperately to have an answer, and that primes us to look for certainty and an answer on election day in a way that totally contravenes the facts and everything we know about the process, that's actually, it comes back to Trump's own conduct. Like, it is his conduct that is so exhausting, that wears people down to the point where we just need to have that answer on election day, even though everything we know tells us that factually we cannot have that answer as fast as we want it.
Right. I mean, there are so many things that are going to prevent us from getting an answer on election day. I mean, USPS delays, having an authoritarian president who's creating tons of confusion left and right.
The fact that Pennsylvania won't start counting. I mean, that
they've got all these ballots, just that they're not counting yet. Being that we're in a pandemic, all of these sorts of things, the increase of mail-in ballots, it's going to take time for our election to be decided. And also, the federal law allows for that time, right? We have this December 8th safe harbor date. All of the disputes, all of the votes have to be counted by then. December 14th, that's the date when the Electoral College votes happen. And so when we see all that, it's completely normal for this process not to happen on election day, potentially not to happen until December. And when we see that, we need to be okay with it and remind the people who we know that it's okay. Why are we having an election party? Virtual election party. Why are we having a virtual election party? Because we're not going to know the results. So sure, we can have a virtual party, but then we're not going to get results out of it. Maybe we should have a week. Maybe we should have a month. It's election month. So
yeah, I mean, we are all rooting for some kind of uncontested result, but I think that being really self-aware about why it's so hard to accept this is really important. Like, understanding why it's hard for people to wait long enough for everybody's vote to be counted, which, by the way, is like something we should all want to do. Like, doesn't matter what you believe in. You should want everybody to get their vote counted.
Right.
A perspective that is becoming more controversial by the day.
Right. And that brings us to our next segment. Let's talk a little bit more about Texas.
Always up for talking about Texas.
Always good to talk about Texas. So we've brought up Texas in a few of our episodes already, but I specifically want to take a look at what's happening right now in Texas. We've seen Republicans have always had Texas. Texas has always been super red. Sometimes Democrats don't even try. But right now, Trump is only ahead in Texas by, wait for it, 2 points.
What? 2 points?
That's 2 points.
Like margin of error, 2 points?
Yep, 2 points. Margin of error, 2 points. And that made my ears perk up, because that brings us to some of the major news that has been happening in Texas over the past few days. And so we've talked a lot about how Governor Abbott has said every county in Texas only gets one mail-in drop-off box for voting. Just one. And just one for every county in Texas. So Loving County with its 100 people and Harris County with its 4.7 million people, one drop box. And so when we think about that, it totally makes sense because they're only 2 points ahead. And so they have to be thinking of that and thinking, wow, that's great, because fewer people will turn out to vote. And maybe that'll be able to close that 2-point gap. And we also saw that in a ruling late Monday night, a panel of 3 judges, all appointed by Trump, upheld this ruling, saying that it abridges no one's right to vote, except for all of the people who won't vote because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the results of this have been pretty predictable, very similar to what we saw yesterday in Georgia. There's a video that Houston Chronicle reporter Zach Despart took yesterday at the crack of dawn, showing an absurdly long line of cars waiting to drop off their ballots at Harris County's lone drop-off location. We're going to play that clip for you right now.
Oh my God. I mean, look at this. This is like, there are people waiting to vote in all of these cars. This is not like people trying to go to some kind of sporting event. It's transparent GOP voter suppression. It's making it harder for everybody in those cars to participate in our democracy, and it's working to ensure fewer people are able to have their voices heard. I mean, when you mentioned Loving County and Harris County. Harris County, someone pointed out to me yesterday, is the size of Connecticut. Like, you have to imagine if there was one ballot drop-off box for the entire state of Connecticut versus Loving County that has 100 people. Like, I know people who have 100 people in their family. It's one family and something the size of Connecticut having the same amount of voting resources, which is clearly not fair. But what else is different about Loving and Harris County? Well, Harris County is also the most diverse county in the country. Its population is 45,000 times larger than Loving's, but also much more likely to vote Democratic. And so, yeah, I mean, there is no legitimate basis for decision-making like this on the part of Texan leadership, right? Like, there's no metric or math you can do that makes this make sense. Kind of the only reasonable basis for this is the desire to suppress votes in Harris County.
Mm-hmm. And it's really infuriating that this is what's happening during a pandemic. During a pandemic, that there's this attempt to have fewer people voting and especially have fewer people voting through mail-in ballots. One drop-box location, it makes it so that, and for some people, having to drive to that drop-box location, we're talking an hour drive or more.
Size of Connecticut, yeah. But also, let's remember that Governor Abbott also says that you have to wear a mask at the grocery store, but you don't have to wear one at the polling place. So it's driving more people who might be uncomfortable being indoors with a lot of people who may be unmasked and breathing on them. It's driving all of those people to this one ballot drop-off box too. I mean, it's like a Rube Goldberg machine of voter suppression happening in a Texas that might go blue.
Mm-hmm.
It's just wild.
Emily, give me some good news. Just give me something.
Alana, I appreciate that you ask for it when you need it. Okay, so I think we do have some good news, and it's like a good news that's like you have to look at it from a certain angle to see its good side, because it ties in very much to voter suppression. But so Tuesday was the first day of early voting in the Lone Star State. And every indication we have suggests that this is just like Texans are so excited to cast their votes this year. We've been looking at stories from all around the state of record numbers of people showing up to vote. And as you know, like I said, you got to look at this from the right angle, because looking at it from the other angle, like the long lines at polling places, to me, when I see them, look like voter suppression, because it's people having to spend their workday waiting in line to vote. But it also means that people are wildly enthusiastic, that there are record-setting numbers of people who want to vote. And like also, my general perspective is that when the government tries to silence people and those people tell the government to get stuffed, it's a really good thing. Like, I am all for people who are ready to tell the government to get stuffed. And that's what we're seeing here, right? Every single person standing in those long lines is saying, you tried to silence me. You tried to make it hard for me to vote. You made it really hard for me to register. You took away my options, but you know what? I am going to be heard. And that is incredibly inspiring to me. I think that the more people who refuse to be deterred and who stick up for themselves, the better off this nation will be and the better our chances are of sort of retaining our democracy going forward. So that's what's happening in Harris County. Really stubborn people are telling the government to get stuffed and they're showing up to be heard. And so the other stat that I want to like bring out here, according to election officials, as of this afternoon, more than 175,000 people have voted early in person. And yesterday's number doubled the county, Harris County's previous record for first day turnout, surpassed Georgia's entire state total for their first day of voting on Monday. I mean, these are just like record-shattering numbers.
Okay.
Is that good
Those
enough?
are some good news. I'm feeling better. Yes. Yes. But, you know, the Republican Party keeps trying, though. And it just makes me mad. You know, I think, for example, we saw that video and it had a ridiculously long line and everybody was in their cars, which, okay, that makes me feel a little bit better. And then I heard that the Republican Party filed a lawsuit against Harris County for having these drive-through and curbside voting programs during a pandemic. So what they are trying to do right now is say that voters, elderly voters, voters who suffer from disabilities, you shouldn't vote in person because people can be there without masks. You also, if you're going to go in person to a drop box, which you'll have to sometimes travel an hour or more to get there, you shouldn't even be in a car. You shouldn't even be protected by a car. This means that they're trying to make it so that some people actually have to choose potentially between life and voting. That's how important it is to the Texas Republican Party to suppress votes. But new news today, which, okay, a little bit of good news, that we heard just a little bit ago that the Court of Appeals dismissed that suit. So I feel a little bit better about that. But it doesn't change the fact that there is just constant voter suppression. And it's heartening to know that it might not work this year in Texas. Record 16.9 million Texans are registered to vote in this election. And another stat, according to state data, an increase of about 1.8 million voters since 2016, and 60% of new registered voters are under the age of 25 or people of color.
Yeah. I am going to dive into these numbers, but I have to say one more thing on the voting by car thing. All across this country, you can get a COVID test in your car. You can drive through and get a COVID test, right? Like everybody's going and getting tested for this virus. And the strongest privacy protections that I know of under law really apply to healthcare information. HIPAA makes it, the way healthcare information has to be handled is very, very seriously protected by law. We all know it's super annoying. You have to have like a secure messaging system to text your doctor or email your doctor. It's like a huge pain in the butt. You got to like log on to a portal because you can't just email your doctor because this information is so secure and people have to be so careful about the way it's handled. If medical information can be exchanged in a drive-through, then certainly a ballot drop-off or a vote can take place. I mean, that's to me what's so crazy. Again, there's no legitimate basis. In fact, this is just pure suppression tactics. So, okay, I'm getting off my soapbox on that. Moving back to these registration numbers, that to me is much better. You gave me better news than I gave you, which is these record numbers of voter registration. I mean, so I can understand if we live in a world where the more people vote, the better it is for the Democrats. I can understand why the Republicans would be very unnerved by these record numbers of registration. The more people that get involved in democracy and partake of this democracy, the worse it looks for them. We just heard that in Travis County, which is where Austin is, I love this, 97% of the county's 850,000 eligible voters are registered. That is, I've never heard of a registration rate that high. Yeah, I know.
That's great.
That's definitely like grounds for snaps. So yeah, it's a huge impact that these numbers should have. So, you know, the painfully long lines are, I think, in part due to remarkable enthusiasm on the part of the people to be heard. And if I were the Texas GOP, I would hopefully have the ethical constraint not to involve myself in voter protection, but I would be very, very nervous.
Hmm.
Oh,
Hmm.
well, that's the last uplifting dialogue we might have for a while. Let's savor it, Alana.
Yes, let's just take it in.
Well, what did we learn today? Let's think back to Jay. What did Jay, oh my goodness, we started off with the Supreme Court confirmation hearings.
They will not save us. No Supreme Court will save us. In fact, they will probably make it easier if Trump wants to carry out his plan. And we have a Supreme Court that, particularly with the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, who made all of these non-responses, they're not going to be, as you've said, the parent in the room. She hasn't expressed any affirmation of any firmly held beliefs, issues on whether the president should have absolute power to interfere with the outcome of elections. She wasn't able to say that he can't do that. That's something that she should be able to say. And it's really disheartening and difficult to understand why we can't have a Supreme Court nominee who will actually be able to do the right thing when it comes to this election.
Yeah, it is depressing. I think we really kind of should explore more what Jay said about the sort of conservative judge-making machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
It starts very, very early. The Federalist Society and this sort of conservative legal movement is looking for people who are so ideologically aligned and such team players that they will be more bound by their team than by the law, which is really scary, because if we don't have courts that can at least provide us a reasonable impression of being impartial. I mean, that's the judge's ethical duty, right? Is to have the appearance of impartiality. We don't actually ask judges to really be impartial. We ask them to just really please fake it super, super, super well. And they're not even faking it super well anymore. I mean, with these hearings, what we saw was a person who is joining a Trump qualified bench of justices that I very much fear will let their political ideology make decisions for them.
Mm-hmm. And it also sort of goes back to what we're thinking about on this election day and what's going to happen on election day too, and how it could be very well allowed by the Supreme Court, not only by the Supreme Court, but potentially by the American people if we're not properly informed. Because the poll that Jason showed us today showed that most people expect, or a lot of people expect, to have results on election night, which will create this atmosphere where the GOP and perhaps even the Supreme Court, which is going to be pretty loyal to Trump at this point, will feel the need to give people that resolution.
Yeah. Like we said, we understand why people are psychologically so tired that they are desperate for an answer. But hey, if you are a producer for a major news network watching our show tonight, and you want to start putting some procedures in place to decrease that Super Bowl feel and help educate the public about why we need to wait days, if not weeks, for an accurate count of everybody's voices, votes, and choices, well, I certainly hope you're paying attention tonight. And if anybody out there knows those people, call them and tell them to do responsible coverage.
Please.
Yeah, please. We're not afraid to beg. We're not afraid to beg.
Do it for the people standing in line in Texas, despite all the voter suppression.
Yes, do it for people who are waiting 8 hours in line with like probably a screaming toddler in the back of their car and like no snacks. To do it for them. Do it for people who took a day off from work, a job they can't afford to miss. Do it for people who didn't have dinner because they skipped work to vote. I mean,
or who are risking their health.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at least people are registering in record numbers and turning out in record numbers and shattering all the records. I hope Texas keeps at it. I hope other states follow suit. If you want to get in on those record numbers, I mean, vote early, in person, drop off your ballot, like show up for this one. Voting is awesome, y'all. Go make a plan to do it and drive everyone you know. Well, this has been our show. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to be back tomorrow. I'm actually out tomorrow. So if you need a break from me, tomorrow is a great day to tune in.
I'll miss you.
I'll miss you too. But you're going to be in really, really good company. You've got Zach Mallitz and Becky Bond of Real Justice PAC joining.
They're from the Social Practice.
And the social practice. Thank you. Thank you. My notes were wrong. Well, they're going to be joining us in my absence. They're going to be keeping Alana company and talking exactly, concretely, actionably about ways to stop the Trump campaign from undermining our democracy and scamming their way into the White House for another 4 years. I'm Emily Galvan Almanza. It's Alana Sivin. This is The Count. See you tomorrow.